Hardy Cross, District Superintendent of the Smoky Mountain District, with us today. We have had technical issues. That's the way it often goes at meetings and church events, and we cannot use the monitors. We had all this stuff prepared, or Kelsey does, but so we're using this. So I've been asked to ask you, could you move down a little closer if you can't see this? She has a large presentation of PowerPoints that she'll be making. So if you feel like you're okay, stay where you are. I know we're all creatures of habit and we like to just stay put. And but if you can't hear or you need to come closer, then do that. But welcome you and blessings on this event. And let's begin with prayer. God of grace and God of glory, you are our fortress and refuge. We come into your holy presence to offer you our praise and give you thanks for loving us, redeeming us, and giving us the gift of eternal life through your Son, Jesus. We give you thanks for this gathering today of the United Women in Faith. May your Holy Spirit bless our time together. Continue to guide and direct our steps as we faithfully dedicate our lives to you and doing your work on earth. Make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. And hear us as we join together in the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Good morning. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Rhonda Turner, and I am the Spiritual Growth Coordinator for the district, and I attend Peck's Memorial United Methodist Church. So I am going to do the prayer guide for you today. And the first thing I wanted to do is, the scripture for today is from Matthew 6, verses 19 through 24. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. And the reflection today is from Tapawa Chimbadzwa, a global mission fellows from the International Zimbabwe serving in Sierra Leone. As a Global Mission Fellow, I have been serving and fellowshipping in Sierra Leone, witnessing God's work in my life and in the community. My goal is to grow in personal and social holiness as I follow Jesus' example of love and service. I have been blessed to join St. Matthew's Magbaraka Church, where I have grown spiritually through hearing the word and engaging in prayer. However, I struggled to find my place in the church as most of the youth and young adults had left for higher education. I felt alone and lost until I discovered the joy of working with children. They welcomed me with open arms and hearts, and I felt God's presence in their smiles and laughter. I was honored to participate in their baptism certificate presentation and celebration, and I realized that I found my family in the church. Working with children has been a source of inspiration and growth for me as I see and serve differently as a Global Mission Fellow. I look forward to growing with the community I serve and sharing God's love with them. Our gifts at work, our funds are supporting the Tacoma Community House in Tacoma, Washington, Immigration Services Program, specifically for one-on-one case management and U.S. citizenship and immigration services application support. Birthdays of the week, we have Amanda Mountain, Camille Manigan, Danielle Christian Moore, Jane Pera, Jean Natmo, Kia Shaw, Nancy Carew, Kemba Junga, Priscilla Hassa Malangi, Valerie Mossman Celestin. And our midweek prayer for this week, God of Naomi and Ruth, guide us as we follow the marvelous legacy of those that have paved the way and inspire us to open new opportunities for generations to come. Amen.
Well, good morning. I'm Susan Daffron, and we are delighted to see you all today. At this time, we will receive an offering. The offering will go 100% to mission giving. So if you'll pray with me. Lord, we are just so delighted to be with you and be with each other today. We thank you for working us through difficult times, through trials and tribulation, Lord, and we just pray that you will use our offerings to make someone's life a better place to be. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good morning. I'm Donna Gardner, and I am the action coordinator for Holston Conference and have coordinated this event. And I just welcome all of you out here. We're so pleased to have all of you here with us. And I was just noting in my mind, I've heard Dr. LaPorte's presentation twice, her first time at LMU and now here. And both times there were technical glitches, so I think I'm the common denominator. So I'm going to call Glenda up here from Green Meadows for a minute. She wants to talk to you all about the Wesley House tour.
I'm Glenda Eastridge, and I'm District Vice President, but I'm President of Green Meadow Unit. And we were going to have a field trip. You can tell I'm a retired teacher. We were going to have our field trip for our unit to Wesley House. Well, then that field trip for our unit turned into a field trip for the district, for Smoky Mountain District, and then that turned into a combined field trip with Tennessee Valley, but it's going to say simple. There is no registration. There is no fee. Show up at Wesley House with your donations. And we've got three folks, Erin has said that we've got three folks who are going to be talking to us about the ministries there at Wesley House. Daniel Myers, the president of Tennessee Valley, is going to share with us about other mission spots around the country that our mission dollars go to support. So if you have questions, Becky Moses goes to Central in Lenoir City. You can contact her if you're in Tennessee Valley, or me. My number is out there somewhere, or find somebody and they'll get you connected with me. We have sent out a list of hands-on things, and Becky just told me that that has been updated somewhat. So between now and August 23rd, you should get an update on some other things that you can do for hands-on.
Okay, a couple housekeeping items. Our restroom, if you go out towards the narthex and turn towards the left, there's a restroom out there that you can utilize. And I guess that was the main thing. So I'm going to introduce Dr. LaPorte. I'm going to take some excerpts from her bio, and I know in her presentation she has a little bit more about her background as well. Dr. LaPorte was born near Sioux City, Iowa. She grew up on a farm where her best friends were the dogs, cats, geese, turkeys, goats, hamsters, guinea pigs, and rabbits that surrounded her on her days spent outside playing. She credits this upbringing to the development of her deep love of animals. Dr. LaPorte knew even as a teenager that she loved science and wanted to pursue a career as a surgeon. Upon high school graduation, she received a full academic scholarship to the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, where she was inducted into the University Honors Program and awarded a specialized position as an athletic tutor for the NCAA. She graduated with her bachelor's degree in biology in 2007 and progressed to Creighton University Dental School. During dental school, Dr. LaPorte performed research surrounding cleft lip and palate malformations. Her research was submitted by the Creighton University faculty and subsequently awarded a travel scholarship to the National Institute of Health in Washington, D.C., where she presented her findings to scientists working on the cutting edge in the dental and medical fields in our nation's capital. After dental school, Dr. LaPorte matriculated into the oral and maxillofacial surgery residency program at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. She attended medical school while at Nebraska Medical Center. She received her Doctor of Medicine in 2016. After medical school, Dr. LaPorte successfully completed a 2-year residency training in general surgery with a special focus on head and neck surgery, pediatric general surgery, as well as cleft lip and palate and craniofacial surgical training through the Omaha Children's Hospital. She also worked for 2 years as a resident surgeon on the highly specialized Boys Town National Research Hospital cleft lip and palate craniofacial, lots of big words, multidisciplinary team clinic. She was then appointed as chief resident in the oral and maxillofacial surgery division at the Nebraska Medical Center. In addition to her academic accomplishments, Dr. LaPorte enjoys spending time with her husband, Kevin, their son Shelby, their 3 dogs, Daisy, Senor, and Lenny, their cats Josie and Gracie, and their guinea pigs, Bill and Ted. She enjoys music and has played the piano since the age of 5 years old. She loves cooking, baking, and being in nature. I'll give you a sideline about Bill and Ted, the guinea pigs. Bill was supposed to be a boy and had a litter of little guinea pigs. So, and she had a baby shower for the guinea pig, for Bill. So, and now I will turn the time over to Dr. Laporte.
Some of this audio. Well, then I'm going to ask you to move forward because I don't want to shout. Okay, can you hear me, Kim? No, it's not. Is it on? It's on. Yeah, I really, really, really despise microphones. That's all. Okay, I'm going to quickly give you a little introduction on who I am and what I do. I am a transplant to East Tennessee. I grew up in the Midwest and I did all my education there. I went to University of Nebraska for my undergrad, as my mom said. Are we live streaming? Yes. Oh, okay. I went to Creighton Dental School and got my first doctoral degree there and graduated in 2013. Yeah. Okay. Then I went to Nebraska Medicine from 2013 to 2019 and completed my Doctor of Medicine and my surgical residency there. This is my husband, and this is the day of my medical school graduation, and this is Lenny and Senor. Senor is almost 18 now and barely hanging on, but he's still kicking. One of my favorite memories from my training is I went to Peru on a surgical mission trip and had the opportunity to operate down there in an operating room in June with no air conditioning. That gentleman with the mustache who's my program director, he was extremely influential in my life, one of the most important people to me. And then this is just on our last day in the operating room together. I said I wanted to match, so I drew a handlebar mustache on my mask. And this picture in the middle is when I turned my pager off for the very last time after 6 years of being on call, working nights, evenings, weekends, holidays. It was a very strange feeling. You know, for the longest time you want to light that thing on fire, and then all of a sudden one day you just turn it off and you're done. And then you ask them, please don't make me go. I'm not ready. This was when I got boarded. So the way that the boards work, they make you graduate and then you have to practice for 2 full years before you can get boarded. And the boards are an oral exam, so you sit and you have different examiners come in your room. It's very intimidating. You have to be able to think on your feet. I studied a lot. After I took it, I was certain I failed. So when I passed, I was pretty excited. This is my husband, Kevin. We like to travel. We like food. Oh, I probably shouldn't tell you this. So in Peru, a delicacy is they eat guinea pigs, which as the proud keeper of guinea pigs, you know, kind of sends shudders down my spine. But they roast them on a stick and you just kind of eat them like a turkey leg. So this is us in Peru trying the guinea pigs. This is my son, Shelby. I think I have him right here. This is more what he looks like now. And this is from the first time I gave this presentation. My husband was giving me a good look pep talk that morning on FaceTime. We love the mountains of East Tennessee. We love being outside. We love our pets. We really love living here. We have 3 dogs and 2 cats. I love coffee. I like to have fun, but not past 8:30 p.m. All right, so that's a little bit about myself. Let's see. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about is very near and dear to my heart, and it's something I've been ruminating on for many, many, many years, and the fact that I had an opportunity to speak about this and it's kind of taken off has been great. So we're going to talk today about imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. I'm going to move this. I have no financial disclosures. I wish I did. I'd have less debt. All right, we're going to start with a poem by Valerie Neese, and it's called How to Throw Like a Girl. Apologize to the ball before throwing it. Get paid 70 cents per dollar a man gets paid to throw the same ball. Throw the ball and watch a man take credit for throwing it. Wear a pantsuit to fool people into thinking you're actually a man throwing the ball. Throw on a pink scarf so that people know that even though you're man enough to wear a pantsuit while throwing a ball, you're also not afraid to show off your femininity. Throw the ball through a glass ceiling. Let a man interrupt you while you throw the ball. Throw the ball and wonder if you're achieving work-life balance. See other women throw a ball and compare your size of your thighs to theirs. Before throwing the ball, order a green juice and take a sip. Don't finish it. It tastes terrible. Find someone to tell you to smile more while you throw the ball. Throw a ball and then reschedule your brunch plans for the 4th time. Before you throw the ball, watch a YouTube hair tutorial and attempt a fishtail waterfall braid. Throw the ball, then tweet about it with the hashtag #ThrowLikeAGirl. Throw a ball, constantly ask others what they think of you throwing the ball. Make a vision board of yourself throwing the ball, and after reading an article in Marie Claire, learn that the best way to throw a ball is to stop looking for a ball to throw. So let's start at the very beginning. What is imposter syndrome? So basically, loosely defined, it's doubting yourself, your abilities and your achievements, questioning your intelligence and accolades, and feeling like a fraud despite being eminently qualified for the position that you hold and the things that you do. Who developed this concept? 2 female PhDs, Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes, in the 70s developed this concept, and what they found was they were mentoring postdoctoral candidates who were women, and they noticed a trend among these women, that they all kind of had this similar mentality. And they couldn't figure out why, and they couldn't figure out how to get past it. What they said was, despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing that they are really not bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. Their initial findings have spearheaded decades of research, thought leadership, and initiatives to address this imposter phenomenon. So since then, there's been a ton of research on this, and so now we know that there's several different types of imposter syndrome that one can suffer from. The first is the perfectionist. The primary focus of the perfectionist is how something is done. If the work is done and it's conducted and it's not absolutely flawless and perfect and everything doesn't go off without a hitch, this equates to feelings of fraud or failure. The second is the expert. So this phenomenon is where the knowledge vision of the individual is the primary concern, and the focus is how much do you know or how much can you do, and you expect yourself to know everything. Even a minor lack in knowledge brings feelings of failure and shame. Next is the soloist. This is more about who completes the task. So if you can't do everything all by yourself all the time, you view yourself as a weakness or a failure. The next one's the natural genius. So if you have to work really hard at whatever you're doing or learning, and it doesn't just flow through you naturally, then this evokes feelings of shame or failure. And then finally is the superhuman. The superhuman is basically if you aren't killing it at everything all the time, then you're not good enough. So if you're not the best at everything that you do, you feel like a failure. I added one, this is anecdotal, this is not research based, but this is something that I struggle with, and I struggle with it all the time, and I put it in there because I feel like it's very common, and I called it the thief of time. And what this is when you have some free time or downtime and you're not constantly using it for some productive purpose, you feel like a failure or a shame. So if you take time for yourself to just relax and do nothing productive, you feel guilty that you should have been using that time for something more valuable. And this is something that I struggle with. And then you translate that to feeling like a failure or a fraud. So then this results in the imposter cycle. So what happens is you have a fear that you're not good enough, that you're not smart enough. You work really, 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 really hard so that nobody finds out that you're actually not good enough. You overcompensate. As a result, you do really, really well. And things go well and things turn out well for you and you get good grades or whatever it is that you're aiming for. And then you get positive approval or praise. And then that enhances this phenomenon where you feel insecure, like, well, now I need to work even harder because I fooled them this time, so I have to keep fooling them next time. Because this is not really, I'm really not this good, so I have to keep overcompensating. It creates a distorted perception of yourself and a constant assumption that you're falling short of what everybody else around you has to offer. This ultimately leads to burnout and poor mental health. So there's a quote from Maureen Zappala. She's a former rocket scientist at NASA, and she said, "For years, I thought NASA only hired me because they needed women. I felt underqualified and in over my head. I worked long hours to try and prove myself. I was too afraid to ask for help, because I thought if I'm really as smart as they think I am, I shouldn't need help, and I should be able to figure this out on my own." She worked for NASA for 13 years. Then what happens is individuals start to perceive themselves as fully defined by their weaknesses and not their strengths. Who does imposter syndrome affect? Well, disproportionately, it can affect anybody. I want to be clear about that. It can and it does. But it disproportionately affects women, minorities, people of color, or anybody who's in any situation where they are the underrepresented demographic. This has also been studied within the context of race, and there's actually an entire department at the University of Michigan for this, and it's headed by Dr. Kevin Coakley. And they found that even Black African-American college students who go to historically Black universities struggle with this phenomenon of imposter syndrome, where they don't feel like they really earned it, they don't feel like they belong there, and they struggle with feeling like they're good enough or that they deserve to be where they are doing what they're doing. The current critics of the imposter phenomenon within the context of race and ethnicity usually say, first of all, it's being attributed to being a white woman's problem that doesn't attribute to other individuals. Or they say that they don't identify with the construct and they see themselves as being incorrectly misdiagnosed with imposter syndrome and that it's being put upon them. And so they say, well, I don't want you to tell me this applies to me because I don't think it does. Essentially, it blames women and people of color for feeling like imposters rather than focusing on the cultural trends and phenomena that have created these systems the way that they are. And some people feel like it's going to distract from fixing the bigger problems. Dr. Coakley kind of sums it up. He says, it's fair to say that there are limitations of the original imposter phenomenon concept as applied to people of color. Therefore, does not address the role that environmental stressors such as racism and discrimination contribute to the imposter feelings among minoritized individuals. There is literature on this, and it does impact the mental health of people of color just as it impacts the mental health of everybody that it affects. And it's important because it shows that there needs to be more research, and there's a lot more to be learned about it. This is a very complex phenomenon. We found that students of color experience racialized imposter feelings when they contend with messages about only being in college because of the color of their skin, so being labeled as the token diversity individual. These can become internalized and sow seeds of self-doubt, and then a decline in self-confidence, performance, and lower job satisfaction, which ultimately result in more perceived stress and diminished mental health. So really, at the end of the day, it's kind of a chicken and egg question. So ultimately, he says, persistent beliefs or actions of intellectual and professional self-doubt among racially minoritized people due to experienced systems or principles of racial oppression and inequity is how he would define imposter syndrome as it applies to people of color. While more imposter phenomenon research is needed to examine the extent to which minoritized employees are experiencing it, it's clear that the relationship between race and imposter syndrome is complex and deserves to be studied more. Not that imposter syndrome should be dismissed. It's clear that the racialized imposter phenomenon has distinct ramifications for workers of color and organizations. So current scholars basically conclude that imposter phenomenon is legitimate, but it can and should be studied within all of the different demographics that it affects. It shouldn't just be focused on one group of individuals, women, for example. And it shouldn't be just reduced to racism or bias, because it's more complicated than that. And we need to develop a culturally informed understanding that takes into consideration the role of possible racial discrimination. So in other words, to sum up imposter syndrome and how it affects all individuals who are affected by it, when you experience systemic oppression, or you're directly or indirectly told your whole life that you are less than or undeserving of success, and you begin to achieve things in a way that goes against a long-standing narrative in the mind, imposter syndrome will occur. So where does this start? How does this happen? In the initial paper that they published in the 70s, Dr. Clancy and I said, we do believe that the societal stereotype of women being less able intellectually than men begins to exacerbate and conform at an early age the self-doubts that have already begun to develop. We know for a fact that women are consistently held to lower expectations in their ability to perform successfully on a wide variety of tasks. When women do outperform others, it is also more likely to be attributed to circumstantial or temporary factors, such as luck, effort. In contrast to men, who are much more likely to have all of their excesses attributed to the internal stable factor of ability. So basically, men are given the benefit of the doubt that they're the natural genius. And for somebody to take women seriously, they have to really prove themselves before anybody will pay attention. So there was this study that I found that was interesting. Stanford looked at 1.5 million research papers from 1779 to 2011. That's a lot. And what they found was there was a huge difference in how frequently men cited their own research versus women citing their own research. And in academia, every time you get citations on the paper that you've published, it gets you more, it's like a feather in your cap, something that goes on your resume. So the more widely cited you are, the faster you're going to be able to propel forward in your career. Well, they found that between 1779 and 2011, men were 56% more likely to cite themselves than women. And critics said, well, okay, but there weren't very many scientists that were women in a lot of those early years, and so there weren't really women publishing papers. It's like, well, okay, that's a valid point. So when you look at just the last 2 decades, when there are an abundance of women scientists, men are even more likely to cite their own research. 70% more likely to cite themselves than women. There's also a difference in how women and men culturally and internally attribute failures that they have experienced. Women are more likely to explain failure as a lack of their own ability, that they weren't good enough, they didn't have what it took. Whereas men are more likely to explain their failure due to circumstantial reasons. It was a bad day, I had bad luck, or the task was too difficult, it was disproportionately difficult. And then as a result, women on a large scale have internalized this self-stereotype that you're not as competent. So what's the impact of this? How does this affect us, people, everybody? The differential attribution of success and failure by boys and girls is already able to be identified in research by the age of 10. If a woman does well, it cannot be because of her ability, but instead is viewed as some sort of a fluke. If a woman is to acknowledge her intelligence and her capability, she then has to go head first against the views perpetuated by an entire culture and society. All of these factors fuel a vicious cycle, that cycle we looked at earlier, of generalized anxiety, lack of self-confidence, depression, frustration, and it's all related to an inability to meet unrealistic self and societally imposed standards of achievement. And then in short, a cultural status quo has developed where women are expected to do more work, do it more often, do it better, and then receive a fraction of the respect that their male counterparts and colleagues would. Do qualifications really matter at the end of the day? Well, let's talk about that. Women's qualifications are more likely to be overlooked by men. Studies of MD, PhD presentations show that men introduced 70% of their male experts as doctor, but only 49% of female experts as doctor when they were speaking. Women speakers, regardless of gender, were more likely to address the experts as doctor with their title. Sadly, we default to granting more respect to men than women, generally speaking. And we're twice as likely to call male politicians, athletes, teachers, and authors by their last names. And you can say, well, does this really matter? Well, it does. In our minds and subconsciously, it matters. Surnames signal higher status. So I'm going to show you a little video here talking about this. Talks really fast too, so I'm going to let you watch it 2 times through because the first time you're going to be like, wait, what?
Still way more likely to refer to male athletes by their last name. They'll also use gender language way
catch that? He talks really fast. I've seen it a lot of times, and I still have to, like, the second time through, regroup with what he's saying. But the point rings true that males of any kind of level of expertise are twice as likely to be addressed by their last names in that formal, in kind of like that show of formality and that show of respect, as a female who is doing similar or the same things or has the same qualifications. Yes. That's on Instagram. It's on an Instagram page that I follow, Adam Grant. I'm going to talk about him here in a little bit. But yeah, it's just a organizational psychologist that I follow on Instagram. All right. So I had this slide in my presentation the first couple times I gave it, and I was curious. I was like, who is this guy? Who is this raging male feminist who's yelling at us? And so I went to his Instagram page and looked into it just out of curiosity, and he's actually an etymologist. So he's a PhD in etymology, and etymology studies the origin of words. So where did words come from? Where did names come from? Why were things named what they are? Why do we call things what they are? And I thought that was really interesting because it's not really directly related to that message that he shares in that particular one. But he has studied and published papers on the names of butterflies and the parts of the brain and why that's called what it is. Hip-hop artists and rappers and where their names came from, and types of beer. So he's got a diverse educational profile. So I want to talk for a minute about stereotype threat. Basically, stereotype threat is one of the symptoms, or it's a coexisting phenomenon that tends to come hand in hand with imposter syndrome. And what this is when you know that you are one of very few individuals doing whatever it is that you're doing. Every single time you go into a challenge, you feel like the weight of your whole demographic rests on your shoulders. And that if you don't do as well as you had hoped, that you have let your entire demographic down. And I really relate to this because when I took the boards, well, I've taken like 10 different sets of boards, but when I took my biggest boards, which were my first set of medical boards that allowed me to matriculate into my surgery program, and then again, when I took my oral surgery board, so consequently my first and my very last boards, every time I went into that test, in my mind, all I could think was, I have to pass this, or I'm going to give them one more reason to say why women don't belong in surgery. I felt like if I dropped the ball on it, that I was letting all of the women who wanted to do what I was doing down. And that is stereotype threat. And they have actually studied this phenomenon that if you say statements or convey subconscious thoughts or feelings to a certain individual who is about to take, they've studied it within the context of the major exams to apply for law school, medical school, business school, all of that, all of the big tests you have to take and you have to do well on to get into a good program. They've studied this. So if you say to individuals right before an exam, well, generally speaking, African Americans perform lower on this. Guess what happens? Generally speaking, they perform lower. If you say African Americans are just as qualified as anybody else, and their performance scores are expected to be just as high, if not higher, people perform better. So this stereotype threat seeds itself in your mind and lingers and actually affects your ability to perform and convey the things that you already have the ability to perform and convey. The guy in that video has like a really strong Scandinavian accent, and he's really hard to understand, so I just kind of summarized it for you. But basically, this goes hand in hand with imposter syndrome. So you already know you're somebody who's underrepresented. You already know that you're not going to have a whole lot of people who come from your background doing what you're doing. You're well aware of all these things. And then on top of it, you feel like if you don't absolutely just knock it out of the park, then you have let your entire representative group down. It's not just a personal failure, it's a cultural failure. And it's very stressful. I can speak from experience. It's very, very stressful to feel the weight of your entire representative demographic on your shoulders, because we're all going to have failures. And we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. But it can be almost debilitating to an individual going into a challenge, feeling like I'm here as one of thousands, and if I don't make this work, that means that they can't either. It's a lot. So basically, the underrepresented, underexpected, the underdog per se, is, and the undervalued minority in any situation is subject to stereotype threat. It's so powerful, it's been shown to adversely affect scores on major qualifying exams despite all other candidate qualifications. So if someone says to you, men can't be good pastry chefs, women don't have minds for engineering, men will never be as capable of stay-at-home parents, African Americans will never prioritize academics over sports, men were not meant to be compassionate in nursing, women don't have the physical strength to be efficient at surgery, XYZ will never outperform ABC on insert task or achievement. This is where stereotype threat occurs. And then it's perpetuated and adversely affects the performance of the target individual or group. Thus, from this very complex kind of puzzle of all of these different things, imposter syndrome is born and is created. And in the original paper published in the 70s, they said this: since success for women is contraindicated by societal expectations and their own internalized self-evaluations, it is not surprising that women need to find an explanation for their accomplishments other than their own intelligence. And this one gets me every time. I love this, the and yet, because in their paper, this follows that immediately. So they say that, which is like so demoralizing, like, okay? But then they say, and yet, the women we have encountered, by their very perseverance in continuing to succeed against tremendous odds, appear to want to also prove to themselves and society wrong. So despite all of that we perceive to be against us, despite our own self-doubts, there's still something there that we're like, we're gonna do it. We're gonna make it happen. So that was in 1978. So what about now? I have a video for you, and I am 6 months pregnant, by the way. So I'm gonna play this video for you and excuse myself to the restroom, and I'll be right back. So even as recently as Lightning McQueen, we have these subtexts being fed to us, where 90% of the time, who's talking? Right? And I think that that's very interesting because you think about how can a 10-year-old girl already be internalizing things like this? Well, this is how. It's there, and it's not blatant, it's extremely pervasive, which makes it even harder to work against. Oops, just a second here. So this is a quote from her, so a little bit of background on her. Jessica Haidt is the woman who's speaking there, and she works at Pixar Animation Studios. She's been there since 2008, and she helps with film development of the Pixar films. And she said, it's funny, we here at Pixar work in a world of incredible imagination. And yet, it's somehow easier to imagine a talking car than a female race car driver. Isn't that interesting? Let's talk about women in the workplace. So this is going to go into a lot of the research that I've been saving since I was just a sprout. Okay, so Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant are two individuals who have researched and written and published a lot on this. And how many of you guys have heard of either one or both of them? A little bit? Okay. So they worked together and they published a New York Times series quite a long time ago, several years ago, that was basically honing in and focusing on research that had been done showing the differences in the American work environment for men versus women. And it was released when I was a junior in dental school, and I was going through a very difficult time where I was trying to get straight A's, and I needed to be at the top of my class, and I needed to do research, and I needed to get published. I needed to travel to these surgery programs to make sure that everyone knew I was serious, so I could put them on my CV and all these things. And I saw these articles, and all of these things that I had been experiencing that made it so much more difficult to continue on and have tenacity and have confidence in myself. I'd been experiencing so many of these things, and I just kind of thought it was all in my head, that I was overly sensitive, or I was taking things the wrong way, or what have you. And they were discussing these occurrences, these various occurrences in these articles, and it was all backed up by research at universities. And it was like mind-blowing to me. It validated so much of what I had been experiencing, not as simply just something I was drawing up in my mind. So Sheryl Sandberg she kind of rose to fame when she was the CFO of Facebook when it was first up and coming. She wrote the book Lean In. I think she went to Wharton Business School, or no, she went to Harvard. But if you read her book, she comes from a very humble background. And then when she matriculated into some of these big name schools, she suffered from imposter syndrome. She didn't really feel like she fit in with all of these old money East Coast big names that she was going to school with. So as we do, she said, I'm going to work harder, and I guess I have to be better, and I have to be the best, and I'm going to go farther just to prove myself that people like me can do it. She's the founder of leanin.org, and she's a philanthropist. Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist. He's a professor at Wharton Business School, which is basically like the Harvard of business schools. He studies the workplace environment and differential kind of cultural norms in the workplace between different countries, different industries, and he looks at how does this affect people and their mental health and their performance, and then ultimately how does that affect the company. They met because Sheryl Sandberg's husband actually invited Adam Grant to dinner one night, and then Sheryl and Adam hit it off and started talking about his research, and then they decided to write together. The first article that was published in this series was called Speaking While Female. And this is based on a study. There's a few studies in there, but the major one is by a doctor at Yale. And what they found was in a corporate setting, so think of a boardroom, the big round table and all the suits, right? In a corporate setting, male executives who spoke more often were rewarded with 10% higher ratings of competence by their peers and their managers. Whereas women who frequently spoke were punished with 14% lower ratings of competence by their peers and their managers. They also looked at a major healthcare company and a major international banking system and studied that. And they found that when male employees contributed ideas that subsequently brought in new forms of revenue, they got significantly higher performance evaluations. However, when female employees contributed the same or similar ideas that brought in new revenue, it did not improve their manager's perception of them in any form or fashion. It was just expected of them. Additionally, in these studies, the more the men spoke up, the more helpful they were rated and perceived to be. Whereas when the women spoke up more, there was no increased perception of helpfulness. So, in a professional setting, when women speak up, we have statistics and studies that show us that it can actually either not help you or hurt you and work against you. So you're either barely heard because you're afraid to be the one who's talking all the time, or you're judged as too aggressive if you're the one that's talking all the time. And I have lived this. When a man says virtually the same thing, head nods in appreciation. And so ultimately, women end up saying less and shrinking themselves so that they don't get these negative reactions. So it's important to tell people about this, right? We need to talk about this. We need to educate people. People need to know that this is going on. They need to know that this is legitimate, that we're not just being overly emotional and sensitive, that this is a problem. Well, the problem is when you tell people about this, it backfires on you. So our baseline assumption as individuals of intelligence and common sense would be, hey, this is a problem. We need to make this, we need to educate people. We need to bring awareness to this. And we think that when we make people more aware of their biases, or we hope that they're going to be more likely to overcome them. Unfortunately, the research suggests that when you make people aware of their bias, it actually can backfire, and they're more likely to discriminate more once they are made aware of it. And a good example of this is if you read any race, ethnic, any controversial TED Talk or YouTube video, if you read the comments section, it's horrifying. I won't even do it. I won't even look at the comments section. But that's a good kind of like anecdotal cultural example of how trying to inform people of things like this can blow up in your face. This has also been studied. So University of Washington studied this. They were studying, University of Washington and University of Virginia teamed up, and they were studying whether making people more aware and informed of their biases is going to lessen or change their biases. And so what they did was they held this experiment where they informed certain people that stereotypes regarding women in the workplace were very, very common. And then other people, they told stereotypes regarding women in the workplace were very uncommon and not socially acceptable. The ones who read that the stereotypes were common were more likely to rate women as less career-oriented and less capable. They did another study where they had people in managerial positions and they had an applicant, so they had a resume. And there was not a name on it, so it was gender neutral, and it had the exact same qualifications. And they told the managers either that stereotypes with women in the workplace were common, or stereotypes with women in the workplace were not common. And what they found is when they were presented with the idea that stereotypes with women in the workplace underperform, basically that women are perceived to underperform in the workplace, the people who were told that, the managers who were told that, when they were presented with the same resume being a female candidate who subsequently asked for a raise or some sort of advancement in their position, they were 28% less likely in even hiring that person. They also judged her, the same person, just different names on paper, as 27% less likable. The same information, when they were presented with stereotypes regarding men in the workplace, did not alter their judgment or perception of their qualifications in any form or fashion. So who would have thought that informing people about stereotypes and gender would backfire? Well, you know, they studied this even in a non-workplace environment. So the University of Arizona studied this within the environment of at a national park, that when you inform people that certain things, certain types of bad behavior, like not cleaning up your camping site, was what they used for this. That not cleaning up your camping site and leaving trash and debris behind, when people were informed that that was a fairly common thing to happen, guess what? They were more likely to not clean up their camping site, as opposed to people who were told that, oh, you know, everybody keeps it pristine. So basically, we can sum all this up by saying this human phenomenon is that if the mindset is that if so many others are biased, or if so many others exhibit this bad behavior or this mindset, then I don't really need to worry as much about censoring myself or evaluating my thoughts and feelings, because it's common, it's acceptable. The next article was titled, "Madam CEO, Get Me a Coffee." And this was a Harvard professor who studied this. And what they looked at this was all of the extras. So all the extras that occur around an office setting. They called it office housework. So administrative tasks that help, and they take time and they take energy, but they don't necessarily do anything for you in your profession. They found that the someone who's doing the office housework is almost always a woman. So someone has to take notes, someone has to serve on additional committees, someone has to plan meetings and parties, someone has to bring cupcakes and brownies, someone has to clean up the plates and the forks after it's over and wipe down the table. And that someone is almost always a woman. So professional women in business, law, science, leadership are still expected to bring cupcakes, answer phones, take notes, and clean up. And it's not that men don't help, they do, but it's different in that when they help, they are more likely to do so in a public setting where lots of people can observe them helping. whereas studies have demonstrated that women are more likely to contribute with invisible behaviors. So time-consuming activities like assisting others, mentoring colleagues, things where it's just you and that person outside of a group setting. So women's communal contributions, the office housework, all the extras, tend to just sort of disappear because they're not touting them publicly, and they're not going to go and brag about them or tell anybody that they did them. They just do them. The problem is doing everything all the time takes a psychological toll. So there was a study that analyzed 183 studies. It was a meta-analysis of 183 different studies that spanned 15 different countries and a whole bunch of different types of occupations, every type of industry or workplace that you could think of. And they found that women were significantly more likely to be emotionally exhausted. This is because in the quest to care for others, women often sacrifice themselves. For every 1,000 people in a given workplace, 80 more women than men are likely to burn out because we failed to secure our own oxygen masks before securing the masks or assisting others. So in summary, the path to power is still a maddening tightrope for women. We expect men to be strong and capable, but women have to be strong and capable and warm and modest and bake the cupcakes and clean up afterwards and make the coffee and take the notes and return the phone calls and coordinate the phone tree and be on the, my kid's not in school yet, what's it called, the PTA, the committee, etc. We mistake female assertiveness for selfishness, and we mistake female vulnerability for weakness. We should hold all leaders to common standards of competence and character. So now what, right? That's a little bit deflating, all of those things we just talked about. Where do we go from here? How do we overcome this? How do we overcome something that's such a deeply ingrained phenomenon from before the age of 10? Because if you can study it by the age of 10, it's already happening. It's already internalized. So how do we overcome this in our culture and in our professions? Well, we know a few things. Let's talk about the myth of the catty woman. So are there some catty women? Absolutely. Are there some catty men? Absolutely. A little backstory for you here. At the 2014 Winter Olympic Games, the Norwegian cross-country skier Therese Johaug was vying for her first individual gold medal. She was fresh off a world championship in the 10-kilometer race. She was now competing in the 30-kilometer race. More than a grueling hour later, Ms. Johaug landed the silver, finishing less than 3 seconds behind the gold medalist. Less than 3 seconds. The gold medalist who happened to be her training partner, Marit Bjørgen. This is something nobody really wants to talk about. You're not really going to hear about this in the news. The two Norwegians are the top 2 female cross-country skiers in the world, and they're fierce competitors. And they are also best friends. Miss Bjørgen has been the reigning queen for more than a decade. When Miss Johaug burst onto the scene, she was a wonder kid, and she was 8 years younger. She threatened to unseat Miss Bjørgen, and instead of viewing her negatively or having harsh feelings towards her, Ms. Bjørgen took her under her wing. Ms. Johaug said, "She has given me an incredible amount of confidence, and because she has done that, I have become the cross-country skier that I am." But people don't want to talk about that because they'd rather talk about this, right? Everyone loves the broken wine glasses and the fingers pointing and the mascara running and the weaves coming out and all of these things, right? So Marie retired in 2018 as the most decorated Winter Olympian of all time. Not female Winter Olympian, the most decorated Winter Olympian of all time. She was 38 years old. Therese retired in 2022 because she wanted to pursue her dream of becoming a mother. She then gave birth to her daughter Kristen in 2023. And as of August 2024, she announced her return to the sport. So these types of things happen every single day. Women helping women. However, the popular and accepted idea is that women are not supportive of other women. We know the terms, the mean girls, the catty woman, the queen bee, but what's the derogatory male equivalent for these terms? I have never heard one. Does anybody have one? The biggest enemy of women, we're warned, is a powerful woman. However, statistically, that is not true. So Standard & Poor's 1,500 companies was studied by a group of strategy professors over a 20-year period of time. And what they found was that when a woman reached senior management, it was 51% less likely that another woman would reach it. And all the critics said, ha, there you go. She got what she came for, and she wasn't going to do anything for anybody else, right? Well, guess what? The person blocking the second woman's ascendance wasn't a woman, it was a man in all of these circumstances. When a woman was made chief executive, the opposite occurred. In those companies, a woman had a better chance of joining senior management than when the chief executive was a man. So what they concluded in this study was that they said, we theorize and provide strong evidence that women face an implicit quota, whereby a firm's leadership makes an effort to have a small number of women in top management, but makes less effort to have, or even resists having, larger numbers of women. In consequence, the presence of a woman on a top management team reduces the likelihood that another woman occupies a position on the team. The research has repeatedly spoken. Women create opportunities for other women. On corporate boards, despite having a stronger qualification than a man, women are less likely to be mentored unless there's already a woman on the board. When women join the board, there's a better chance that other women will rise to the top executive positions alongside them. We see similar patterns in politics. In Latin America, between 1999 and 2013, female presidents appointed 24% more female ministers to their cabinets than the average for their region. Therefore, the myth of the queen bee is disproven. So do they exist? They do, but they are far, far less common than we like to think. Women are not any meaner to women than men are to one another. Women are just expected to be nicer. We stereotype men as aggressive, and it's viewed as an asset for a man to be aggressive. And we stereotype women as kind, and it's viewed as a detractor for a woman to be aggressive. When women violate these stereotypes, we judge them culturally very, very harshly. So basically, we've got it all wrong. Queen bees are not a reason for inequality, they are the result of inequality. And basically what this flowchart is saying is that when any individual from any background is in a situation where it's made clear to them that there's only one spot for them in whatever is going on, that only one of them will be allowed to participate, it's human nature to then become defensive of that position. It doesn't matter if it's a woman or a man or a person of color. When you are told that you need to be grateful because you're going to be, subconsciously and consciously, that you need to be grateful because you're the only one of your kind that's going to be allowed, that's when people get really, really protective of their spot and their achievements. It's not women, it's all humans, because it breeds a scarcity mentality. The good news is that as more women are advancing in the workplace, the situation is self-resolving. So women were mentored 73% of the time by women, but only 30% of the time by men. And 65% of high potential women who receive support were going to pay it forward to other women, whereas 56% of men. There's even evidence that when research has shown that when women negotiate on behalf of other women or advocate for them, they often boost their own salaries as well. But of course, there's a catch. So, a recent study that was performed of more than 300 executives showed that when men promoted diversity, they were receiving higher performance ratings. So they were good guys who cared about breaking down the barriers, and they wanted everyone to succeed. And this is great. Breaking up the old boys club, right? Whereas when female executives promoted diversity, they were punished with significantly lower performance ratings, and they were viewed as nepotistic and trying to advance their own kind. So this is where we insert the facepalm emoji. And unfortunately, the same findings held true for race. So we have to change the narrative. We have to stop punishing people for promoting diversity. It's time for all of us to stop judging the same behavior from women more harshly than from men. We can disagree and even compete and still have one another's backs. I wanted to insert a little bit because I'm aware of this research on the benefits of faith, prayer, and spirituality on situations like this in mental health. So basically, prayer is a form of mindfulness, and prayer with positive intention is a form of meditation and mindfulness. And we know from research, this has been studied, it's very, very clear that you can actually decrease your physiologic markers of stress in your bloodstream and your body that your brain produces by practicing prayer and mindfulness on a regular basis with a positive intention. So some of the studies we're looking at the hormones that mark stress, and the big one that we talk about is cortisol, but there's lots of different physiologic markers of stress. So blood pressure, heart rate, lipids. There's kind of these little guys that float around called cytokines that when you're worked up and stressed all the time, there are going to be higher levels of them. And that's where you get kind of the generalized inflammation that comes from. But what they found, looking at 45 different studies, was that you could actually significantly lower your physiologic markers of stress and your body's stress response by practicing faith, spirituality, mindfulness, and prayer with positive intention. So the conclusion after looking at these 45 studies was overall meditation practice leads to decreased physiologic markers of stress in a range of various populations. So the science is pretty clear on this. Faith and prayer can improve your physical and your mental health. Prayer and mindfulness are going to attenuate negative thoughts, and they're going to emphasize positive thoughts. There has been research that has shown that meditation and prayer can improve symptoms of certain conditions that we know are impacted by stress, like irritable bowel syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder, fibromyalgia, generalized anxiety, and chronic depression. They studied this a lot during COVID We had nothing else going on. What were we going to do? We had to pray, right? And then we had to study it. So during COVID, they studied this, and this is a recent study in 2020. And they found and published it in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine, and they compared secular meditation, so like if I just take time to meditate at home and I don't have necessarily an intention or a purpose behind it, where I'm just trying to turn my brain off, they compared that to spiritually minded meditation, where you're speaking to a specific higher power, or you have a specific goal in mind, or you're practicing your specific type of spirituality that's important to you. And what they found was that prayer shows that it has similar benefits to meditation. It can calm your nervous system, shut down your fight or flight response, and make you less reactive to negative emotions and less angry. But what they also found was that prayer with spiritual intention showed greater benefits in decreases in anxiety and stress and more positive mood. And interestingly, I thought this was very interesting that they studied this. People who practice prayer with spiritual intention also had increased pain tolerance. So when they would have those individuals put their hands into an ice water bath, they could tolerate it almost twice as long as the individuals who did not practice prayer with spiritual intention. So physically and mentally, we have some control over these things. Another study I found, oh yes. Soul care. Good. I like that. Another study found that through prayer and breath control, you can actually influence your body's release of serotonin. How many of you guys have heard of serotonin before? So serotonin is the chemical, or it's a hormone that your brain produces that basically equates to feelings of happiness, peace, and safety. And you can actually stimulate and balance your serotonin release through prayer, where you can make yourself feel more physically and mentally healthy. And they can study this with a blood draw. Another way we overcome this is by doing exactly what we're doing here today. The power of the pack. So Harvard researched in 2009 that both men and women benefit from having support networks. However, they found that when women had well-connected peers across different groups, the ones who had an inner circle of close female contacts were more likely to land higher positions with greater authority and higher pay. There was no link found for men who had similar groups. Women trying to rise up into leadership face certain cultural and systemic hurdles, what we've talked about today, and it makes it harder for them to advance and defeat that unconscious bias. However, a way to overcome some of this is to form close connections with other women who can share experiences, who've been there, done that, from how to ask for what you're worth to bringing in your unique style of leadership. So the power of the pack is real. So putting yourself in environments that give you the opportunity to meet with peers, get to know each other, share experiences can be a game changer, specifically for women. Chances are, if you make meaningful connections, they'll last a lifetime. Another way that they found, and this was even studied in the 1970s paper with Dr. Imes, they found that changing the narrative on your insecurities is extremely beneficial. So think of people you admire and respect, people you want to be like, people you're in awe of. And then imagine those people telling you about their internal imposter narrative, how they don't feel good enough, they feel like they should do better, they have self-doubt. You would be shocked. But you have to remember that your inner circle feels the same way about you. We're all our own worst critics, and especially as women, I call it the terrorist that lives in our minds, is given disproportionate power. Use your spirituality and the tools that we talked about just a moment ago to overcome imposter syndrome. Remember that faith and prayer can help. This can be physically and mentally beneficial to you. It can help you to shift the focus from the negative to the positive, find self-worth and an identity. You can build a supportive community of faith, and you can surrender control and trust in a higher plan that you may not always have control over. So this is a biblical principle. So in Exodus, Moses states, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh?" So even Moses, he's like the Chuck Norris of prophets, right? Even Moses suffered from imposter syndrome. And the next time that you struggle with this and you think about that and you have that in your mind saying, who am I to be? Who am I? What do I have to contribute? What could I possibly have to say that's important? Think about Moses. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? He had such self-doubt. And look where that went with him, you know. He saved an entire generation of people. In 2 Corinthians, Paul suffers from a messenger of Satan, a thorn placed in his side. And he's just like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I can't work under these conditions. I can't focus. There is no way that I can do the Lord's work while I'm dealing with this. Like, this is too disruptive to me. And he asks God the Father 3 times, please, will you remove this so that I can do what I need to do? Please, it's too much of an impediment to me. I can't focus. I can't do what I need to do. I can't help people. And the Lord replied to him and said, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made more perfect in your weakness. There's multiple other reassurances in the biblical text of divine nature. In Ephesians, God invites you to see yourself the way he sees you, which is loved, chosen, set apart, and holy, adopted as a daughter of God, and united with Christ. You're also reminded to embrace your identity. In order to overcome imposter syndrome, do not lose focus on who you are. Whose you are. Do not lose focus on whose you are. You're encouraged to claim your spiritual inheritance. And he says, so you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him Abba, Father, for his Spirit joins with our spirit, so as to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. You will thrive if you replace the negativity that rattles around in your mind that we all have, which essentially is lies that we all tell ourselves. You will thrive if you learn to replace those with the words from your faith. And remember the reassurances that you have in your spirituality and practice that prayer and meditation with positive intention. It can only benefit you. And as a scientist, from a scientific perspective, I really appreciate that. I love that we can study the physiologic markers of improved mental health from prayer and meditation. Paul is very clear in letting us know that among the many spiritual blessings that God gives to every believer are wisdom, insight, and understanding. He says, I pray for you constantly, asking God, the glorious Father of our Lord, to give you spiritual wisdom and insight so that you might grow in your knowledge of God. I pray that your hearts will be flooded with light so you can understand the confident hope he has given to those he called his holy people who are his rich and glorious inheritance. So this goes back to flipping the script, right? So I look at my little 3-year-old, and he's just got all the potential in the world. And I just think to myself, I'm like, man, he can do anything. He's going to be able to do anything. And whatever he wants to do, I want to support him. And I want him to be good at it, but mostly I want him to be happy. And that's what the Lord is telling you in your biblical text. He looks at you the exact same way. You got to think about it when you're feeling down and you're feeling like you just can't keep going and you run out and you don't have any more to give. You got to think about the view from up there versus the view from where you are. What do you see when you look in the mirror? Allow yourself to view yourself from the outside. Look at yourself from the perspective of your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your church community, your possibly grown children. They view you as superhuman, and then, of course, our chosen family, our close friends, who love you even when you look and feel your worst. Don't be afraid to take control of your insecurities. If there's something you really do not like about yourself, change it. If you feel like you aren't good enough or that you've not done anything to speak of, sit down and make a list of your accomplishments. I did this when we moved from Omaha to East Tennessee, we packed up all the pets and all the stuff, and we had our little caravan, and we drove out here, and I had just walked away from partnership at a surgical practice, and I was going to make partner after only a year, which is an incredibly short amount of time, and I walked away because I was unhappy, and it was just not a healthy situation. And we sort of took a chance on East Tennessee because we wanted to live by the mountains, you know? And I was coming in a situation of a practice that was absolutely brand new, not established, no track record whatsoever. My husband gave up a lucrative contracting business to pack us up and move us here because he wasn't sure how it was going to turn out either, but he knew one thing: we couldn't keep going the way that we were. And I cried the whole drive. I followed my husband. He had the truck and he pulled the trailer. And on and off the whole drive, I was just like, oh my gosh, I hope this is the right decision, you know? And what I told myself was, okay, what do you know, Kelsey? What do you know for sure about yourself? And what I knew at that point in time, from all my education and training and being out a year and having great men in my life, like my program director who had the picture with the mustache, all I really knew was I got good training, I cared about people, I wanted to practice good medicine, and I could work really, really, really hard when I needed to. And so that's what I kept telling myself. I was like, okay, you've got a good foundation educationally, your heart's in the right place, and you will pound the pavement as much and as long as it takes. So just do that. Just do that. Do those things, and you're going to be okay. That's what I told myself. And I listened to a master class on the drive to East Tennessee from Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. Have you guys heard of that book? And it just made me cry more because she was talking about, in her creative process, confronting her fear. Because despite, being a best-selling author and all these things, having immense success, she, like all of us, suffers from imposter syndrome. And whenever she has a new idea for something she wants to write, her immediate response in her mind is, you can't do that, you can't make that work, come on. And so what she started doing, and this is what I did after she talked about it, was she would write herself a letter from the perspective of her fear. And she would say, "Dear Elizabeth, I am your fear, and here is what I am trying to tell you." And she would write down all of the things that were in her mind of why she was worried about doing this, why she felt like maybe she couldn't succeed, why it wasn't going to be something that turned out well, or that people didn't really need or want to hear what she had to say. All of the things that her fear was telling her, she sat there and she wrote it out in a letter form to herself from her fear. And then after she did that, she wrote a letter back to her fear. And she said, "Dear fear, I acknowledge you. I understand you all too well. But what I want you to know is that I'm moving forward despite you. And we're going to do this. And I'm not ignoring you, but I have something I need to accomplish." And so I did that. I wrote a letter from my fear, and then I wrote a letter to myself. And I basically wrote a list of my accomplishments and things that I had overcome to get to that point. And, at this point, I didn't know when I was going to get paid again, honestly. And I just remember looking at the list, and I kid you not, my mind, the terrorist that lives in my mind, said to me, "You didn't do all that." And I was like, wait a minute, yes I did. I accomplished all these things. And I realized that I have been able to accomplish some remarkable things that were very, very hard. So it was going to be okay, because I had good training, I cared about people, and I knew I would work really, really, really hard. And that's exactly what I did. And I'm not going to say that my job isn't stressful, but we're now fast-forwarding the movie 5 years as I stand in front of you, and I can tell you that it worked out, and we're happy, and we're doing okay, we're doing good. But when I think back to myself in 2020 in the middle of COVID, it was really scary, and my fear was speaking very strongly. But when I wrote that list of accomplishments, I thought about it from the standpoint of 16-year-old Kelsey. If 16-year-old Kelsey could see that list of accomplishments, what would she say? What would she think? We would be high-fiving all around, And I realized that I need to be proud of myself. And it's not an excuse to stop working hard. And you still have to do right by people. And you still have to be honest. But you need to be proud of what you've done, because you've done some hard things. All of us have. So if you feel like your insecurities are taking control of you, stop. Be aware that the fear, it's going to be there. The terrorist that lives in your head is going to pay permanent rent. We're never going to get rid of that. But you can take control. If you feel like you're in a creative drought, take a master class. Learn a new language. The little owl on Duolingo is harassing me all the time to practice my Spanish. If you feel physically weak and fatigued, start exercising. Go for walks. Do some yoga classes. Lift light weights. 10 minutes a day will prolong your life. 5 minutes of walking a day will prolong your life. I kid you not. I used to think if I wasn't doing 90 minutes workouts where I was sweated, drenched from head to toe, I used to think, what's the point? And then they released those studies showing that 10 minutes of exercise can prolong your life, So the bigger thing is, just take that step. Don't let your insecurity control you. You control your insecurity. This is really important because every single one of us has a male ally, or multiple, or many men in our life that we can think of who make us who we are. And we wouldn't be who we are doing what we're doing without them. And they've been our cheerleaders, and they've lifted us up, and they've looked at us from that outside perspective that we sometimes need to see ourselves from. And they have all the confidence in the world in us, and they don't expect us to change for them, and they don't expect us to shrink ourselves, and they don't expect us to say less or be less independent or have fewer opinions. They don't expect any of that. They don't want any of that. These male allies are incredibly important, and this presentation gets a bad rap for basically kind of being man-hating, okay? And this is a common theme of things that people would say to me, even as I was going through school and residency, of like, oh, Kelsey, you just hate men. And it's like, I don't. You know, my program director was and is one of the most important people in my life and most impactful. And it's really, really, really important that we acknowledge the male allies, because what they're doing is hard for them too. It takes a lot of courage to be a man who supports and stands up for women and allows them to be who they are fully in their being and be strong and have their backs, and who allows them to, if they want to fight their own battles, fight them. But guess what? I'm right here. When you need to call in reinforcements, just wave your flag. You know, those men are really, really, really important, precious people. And I would say, in some ways, in this battle that we face with this phenomenon, they're almost more important than us. Because it's just like any other major cultural change that's happened in history. Until the majority group, members of the majority group who have the power and hold the power, until we get some of them on board with our goals and our message, unfortunately, nothing is ever going to change, right? So it's only been through the help of strong male allies that women have been able to push through and achieve some of the things they've been able to achieve today. And you know, my husband is watching my 3-year-old right now so that I can be here. I mean, perfect example. And then when I go home, he'll ask me what I want for lunch, and he'll grill me some chicken, and he'll serve it to me, and it will be delicious. You know, those things make a difference. Our male allies are equally as valuable and courageous as our female allies. Don't be afraid to seek guidance from mental health professionals. I feel like this is changing, but there still is such a stigma against seeking mental health care, and it's really, really unfortunate because there's a huge disparity in the access to mental health care in our culture. But I mean, this is something like, we know this. We know there's so much science. Mental health care professionals, they have very specific training. They know what they're doing. We have to take care of our minds just like we have to take care of our bodies. You cannot separate the two. So don't be afraid to seek out a therapist, a counselor, somebody to help you along when you're going through something difficult, or when you're having difficulties, or if you're struggling within your own mind. Be visible and vocal about supporting other women. So this is something that we can do, because just like dispelling the myth of the queen bee, we can build up other women vocally, publicly, and be unapologetic about it. And it's going to normalize that dialogue. It's going to counteract that dialogue of, well, women just love to have cat fights. No, you're never going to hear me say negative things about another woman in a public setting. I mean, we all have people we don't get along with and things like that. But if I'm speaking to or within a setting where other people are listening, I will not speak negatively. And we need to be very, very cautious and careful about how we use our words and our actions with other women so that we do not propagate this myth of the catty woman, because it's not true. It's not true. Okay, finally, the last thing here, an honorable mention for the parents in the room. So mom guilt is very real. It's fierce. It's been studied. Again, you guys know I love research. So, however, what they have learned and what they have proven is that as time passes, the children of high-achieving women progress, the guilt that you feel for being a working mom is actually less and less warranted. So Harvard Business School published a paper in 2015 that found that daughters of working mothers are more likely to be employed, earn more money than those who don't work outside the home. Now, I would like to qualify that because I could never be a stay-at-home parent because it's way too hard. Okay? We all battle with guilt in our own way, but in my interactions with other professional women, this kind of self-hating mentality for leaving your children and going to work, it's a big problem. And we need to acknowledge that there's benefits to all sides, all different modalities, right? So we gotta do what we gotta do. They additionally found that daughters of mothers who work outside the home had a statistically significant higher chance of being in a leadership or a supervisory role than women who didn't. And they said, we did expect that it would affect employment, but we did not expect that it would affect supervisory responsibility. They also found a statistically significant effect on sons of working women, that they were more likely to spend more time caring for family members and doing household chores. So the author of this study has a message for women who are struggling with mom guilt. And she says, with working mom guilt, she says, being employed has long-lasting positive effects on children, both male and female. When you go to work, you're helping your children understand that there are lots of opportunities for them. So I'm reaching the end of my presentation. I have a little excerpt I'm going to read, and you don't have to read it. I put it on the screen because I'm very visual, but you can just listen if you want. But this excerpt is from a thought leader and an author who I really like and admire. Her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I've practiced that many, many times. She is Nigerian, and she's spoken a lot about growing up as a strong-willed woman in Nigeria and how hard it was to be taken seriously because the cultural norms there are very much that you grow up, you get married, you have babies, you cook, you stay at home. And that wasn't right for her. So she's written several different books and things like that, but this is an excerpt from her essay called We Should All Be Feminists. And then after this, I have a quick video, and then I welcome any feedback that you guys, I don't know what time it is. I tend to ramble. So I welcome any feedback that you have at the end. So she says, if we do something over and over again, it becomes normal. If we see the same things over and over again, it becomes normal. If we keep seeing only men as heads of corporations, it starts to seem natural that only men should be heads of corporations. Men and women are different. We have different hormones and different sexual organs and different biological abilities. There are slightly more women than men in the world. About 52% of the world's population is female. But most of the positions of power and prestige are occupied by men. We spend too much time teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them. but the reverse is not the case. Because I am female, I am expected to aspire to marriage. I am expected to make my life choices, always keep in mind that marriage is the most important. Marriage can be a good thing, a source of joy, love, mutual support. But why do we teach girls to aspire to marriage, yet we don't teach boys to do the same? We don't teach boys to care about being likable. We spend too much time telling girls that they cannot be angry or aggressive or tough, which is bad enough. But then we turn around and either praise or excuse men for the same reasons. Gender matters everywhere in the world. And I would like today to ask that we should begin to dream about and plan for a different world, a fairer world, a world of happier men and happier women who are truer to themselves. We must raise our daughters differently. We must also raise our sons differently. We do a great disservice to boys in how we raise them. We stifle the humanity of boys. We define masculinity in a very narrow way. Masculinity is a hard, small cage, and we put boys inside this cage. We teach boys to be afraid of fear, of weakness, of vulnerability. We teach them to mask their true selves because they have to be, in Nigerian speak, a hard man. But by far, the worst thing we do to males, by making them feel that they have to be hard, is that we leave them with very fragile egos. The harder a man feels compelled to be, the weaker his ego is. And then we do a much greater disservice to girls because we raise them to cater to the fragile egos of males. We teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We say to girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful. Otherwise, you will threaten the man. If you are the breadwinner in your relationship with a man, pretend that you are not, especially in public. Otherwise, you will demasculate him. But what if we question the premise itself? Why should a woman's success be a threat to a man? We raise girls to see each other as competitors, not for jobs or accomplishments, which in my opinion can be a good thing, but instead for the attention of men. We teach girls shame, close your legs, cover yourself. We make them feel as though by being born female, they're already guilty of something. We've been raised to expect so little of men that the idea of men as savage beings with no self-control is somehow socially acceptable. And so, girls grow up to be women who cannot say they have desire, they silence themselves, they cannot say what they truly think, and they've turned pretense into an art form. The problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be, rather than recognizing how we are. Imagine how much happier we would be, how much freer to be our true individual selves if we didn't have the weight of gender expectations. Boys and girls are undeniably different biologically, but socialization exaggerates the differences and then starts a self-fulfilling process. I have chosen to no longer be apologetic for my femininity, and I want to be respected in all my femaleness because I deserve to be. I like politics and history, and I am happiest when having a good argument about ideas. I am girly, and I am happily girly. I like high heels and trying on lipsticks. It's nice to be complimented by both men and women, although I have to be honest and say I prefer the compliments of stylish women. But I often wear clothes that men don't like or don't understand, and I wear them because I like them and because I feel good in them. The male gaze as a shaper of my life's choices is largely incidental. Gender is not an easy conversation to have. It makes people uncomfortable and sometimes even irritable. Both men and women are resistant to talk about gender or are quick to dismiss the problems of gender because thinking of changing the status quo is always uncomfortable. Some people will say a woman is subordinate to men because it's our culture, but culture is constantly changing. What is the point of culture? Culture functions ultimately to ensure the preservation and continuity of a people. Culture does not make people. People make culture. If it is true that the full humanity of women is not in our culture, then we can and must make it our culture. I looked the word up in the dictionary. It said feminist, a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. That word feminist is so heavy with baggage, negative baggage. You hate men, you hate bras, you hate culture. You think women should always be in charge. You don't wear makeup, you don't shave, you're always angry, you don't have a sense of humor, and you don't use deodorant. More of us should reclaim that word. My own definition of a feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there is a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better. All of us, women and men, must do better. So I'm going to leave you with this video. This is Alana Maher. She is a rugby player, and she has transformed the world of rugby. She posted a whole bunch of videos online documenting her training and all the things she was doing, and she became very, very good. And I guess in Europe, rugby is still pretty big. But she's basically completely reignited people's passion for this sport that for a long time was diminished. And this is an interview she did with CNN talking about her accomplishments and the things she's done and how she feels about them. And I love this because this is what I aspire to, is this level of control over the cultural phenomenon of imposter syndrome. And then I will play this, and then that's the end of my presentation, so I welcome anything you have to say.